The fact that you've even grew 300% during the pandemic says a lot when everybody was clamping down, shutting down, borders were cut off, communication and systems were being taxed. So, what's the secret? What have you learned? Give us some of your insights.
To set the stage, I started my career in this industry at the age of 16. I was doing outbound cold call telemarketing, selling accidental death and dismemberment insurance to Sears card customers.
Yeah.
That's a job where you get hung up on and yelled at and sworn at a lot. And that experience taught me what it's like to sit in that seat. We've all heard the expression to feel like a number, to be easily replaceable, disposable. And no one wants to feel like that in any organization. And although the initial impetus for starting ClearSource in 2008 was this idea that typically business process outsource or call center companies are heavily focused on efficiency measures like cost per contact or average handle time. They, especially at that time, were much less focused on creating the exceptional customer experience that BMW was known for. And so there I found myself in this vendor operations management role, frustrated with the fact that we couldn't find a partner to help us create that exceptional customer experience. And for Rob and me, that was a light bulb moment. We thought to ourselves, there must be a way to enter this industry and create a model whereby we could deliver the BMW, Nordstrom, Zappos, Disney type customer experience on an outsourced basis. And that was a beautiful concept and reason to start a company. What I realized in December of 2017, looking back on that year, we had well over a 100% rate of attrition. And when I say attrition, I'm talking about employee turnover. And what I saw looking around the organization was essentially a wake of destruction as I realized we had not delivered on that same promise as pertaining to our people. I realized that year that despite being an Inc. 500 company in 2015, 16, 2017, that attrition issue was costing us $1 million a year. Something had to change. And that was the big wake-up call for me that shifted my focus a little bit to say, I don't want a company where anybody feels like a number. I don't want anybody to feel like they're easily replaced, that they're not important. But how do we create change? So I immediately looked around and I said, what messages are we sending to our people that say you're just a number? If you've ever worked in a call center, they have these attendance policies. They're kind of a 3 strikes, you're out policy. And we had those same kinds of policies. What I realized was that those policies apply to our frontline. Do they apply to our managers or HR department or workforce management? No, just to those frontline customer service representatives. And by applying that policy to one group of people and not the other, you create this us versus them mentality.
Tell us a little bit about, okay, in 2017, the moment you decided in your head you're going to bring this change to the organization. This is 10 years after you started. So
Yep.
it's not. So how did you implement that change? Because you probably had leadership already that wasn't thinking about this yesterday.
Yep.
You had to bring this idea. You probably noticed some managers will never be in this mode, and some will cut it, will not cut it. Just tell us about that journey. The reason I'm asking, like after my company had the VC money come in, we had more money. We were going to scale. We were going to hiring more, and I hired more managers as well. It was so hard to implement the methodologies that the CEO founder would come up, and then how to create that change throughout the organization. It's like,
Yeah.
can you teach us how you did that?
When I initially realized that we were sending messages to our people that say you are an object, my first reaction was that we have to stop sending those messages. So the very first thing I did was I took that 3 strikes you're out of attendance policy and I threw it out the window.
Mm-hmm.
That was not met with resounding applause. My managers freaked out
Mm-hmm.
because the way that they saw it was I was taking away their ability to enforce rules and policy, that without such rules and policy, people would just do whatever they want. And that was a big aha moment for me, because what I realized was people tend to parent like they were parented, absent some other source of knowledge or training. And my managers were simply doing what was always done to them. They'd never seen another way. They grew up in the contact center environment where everybody was treated like an object. How could I expect them to do anything different? And what I realized was that the paradigm shift that needed to occur to go from an environment of control and force to one of autonomy and discretionary effort, that would require a lot of time and patience and a completely different approach. And so every single role in the company, its purpose ties to happy clients, healthy, financial, successful staff. I don't care if you're an analyst in workforce management, or you're a business development representative, or you're a customer service representative. Every role supports that collective goal. And the next part of that role definition is, how does the job get done? I list out what are the core tasks for your seat that support that purpose. And for a customer service representative, I might say things like create an exceptional customer experience defined as only providing accurate information and following established processes, and minimizing the time and effort that the customer has to spend on getting their issue resolved, and creating a connection with that customer between them and the brand that you represent. I say that's an exceptional customer
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so now I'm putting the tasks in there. And then the last part of the role definition is I list out the most important KPIs, key performance indicators, whether those are behavioral KPIs or results KPIs, that tell us what success looks like, so that there's no ambiguity
Yeah.
around whether or not the person is doing a quote unquote good job.
When the frontline managers or any one of them balked at the removal of the 3 strikes out rule, because following up on Ike, how many repeats, 70 times did you have to reinforce? Did it take 3 years to go through the whole socialization sequence?
Yeah.
Just the actual story of how that went is fascinating.
You can't take away the tool that everybody's using to do their job without replacing it with something
Yeah.
else.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was probably 3 months after I tossed that policy, I was having a conversation with David Williams, who, Dave Williams, and we were sitting down, we were having a conversation about this one point of frustration, which is I'm teaching these things, but people aren't doing them. And what David suggested was, and this is in the era now, we were having this conversation as kind of COVID was kicking off. And so we're a few years into this process of changing everybody's mindset. I'm saying, David, I'm spending all this time, it's not working. What do I need to do differently? And he said, my recommendation would be to sit down with each person one-on-one, teach the process, have them show you, and then teach them, and have them show you, and have them teach them and show you, and create individual accountability. It required a lot of work. But what I was doing in that process was creating a culture, because if I can win over a few key leaders enough that that knowledge goes from I heard it to I understand it to now I believe it as evidenced by my action, then the second generation, the people who are being led by those leaders, they're now hearing it for the first time in the sense that they're seeing their leader put these things into action. In Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about the flywheel, essentially applying the same amount of pressure over and over and over again in order to get that big flywheel to spin faster and faster and faster. His metaphor was an answer to the question, when did a good company become great?
Mm-hmm.
And the founders all said, well, there wasn't a specific moment where we went from good to great. It was the consistent application of correct principles over a long period of time.
The founder has to find that strength in themselves to be able to do that. I think regardless of whether you have VC or bootstrapped.
Absolutely. I think ultimately it comes down to whether you are bought into the principle enough to actually let that be the guide for your day-to-day actions. We talk a lot about core values. Are they aspirational, or are they things that you actually exhibit?
Yeah.
And I think for us, it comes down to me. There's some concepts in Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink where I really have to take ownership and say, it comes down to, if somebody else isn't doing it, whose fault is that? As you said, our tendency is excuses. It's to point the finger and say, this person is the problem. But the problem with that viewpoint is that as long as I'm pointing my finger at you, I'm essentially saying that I am powerless to do anything about it because I necessarily have to wait for you to change. I don't control you. That's terrible. Right? Nobody wants to be in a situation where you can't do anything about it. And so I say, as far as I'm concerned, the problem is me. What that means to me is as far as I'm concerned, the solution is in my hands. I can do something different to create the outcome that I'm looking for. People say then, okay, how much effort is a reasonable amount of effort to get that person to change? I get that question all the time.
Yeah.
I say, that's up to you. Gary Vaynerchuk would rightfully, in my opinion, say, once you know that you've got the wrong person, let them go. Why? We say, I don't want to be the bad guy that runs around firing everybody. I say, well, you got two options, right? You could keep them on in a role in which they will never be successful, which makes your clients miserable, your team miserable, and that person will be miserable coming into a job every day that they will never be successful. And yet, because of their own fears, they're afraid maybe to go and look for something else somewhere else.
Yeah.
And sometimes inviting them forcefully to undertake that search can be the right thing to do. But here's what I require of my managers. When you let somebody go, I want you to do a post-mortem and say, did I hire the wrong person? Or was it an opportunity in my own leadership that led to us not creating the outcome we would hope for? It's got to be one of those two things.